give people time to come up. Everybody had a cup of coffee after lunch? Yeah, it was downstairs. Really function. I don't like whenever people are like, "Oh, I forgot to eat lunch." It's like, hey, how are you? We're still making our way out of the dock. Yeah. Welcome. All right, just given the time, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure people will be filtering in as lunch wraps up and people make their way upstairs, find the room, which stairwell to go up, getting turned around and everything. So, but we have quite the esteemed panel, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So, thank you all so much for joining. My name is Rebecca Rear. I'm the Director of Climate Policy and Justice at the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. Excited to be here to moderate this panel today, which is Agency Report Back on Justice 40 in the state of Maryland. And we have no better panel to address this topic than we are joined by the Director of the Maryland Environmental Service, Charles Glass, the Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment, Secretary Serena McElwain, Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development, Secretary Jake Day, and the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Planning, Secretary Rebecca Flora. So, yeah, please join me in welcoming our panel this afternoon. And this panel is set up, and hello to our virtual participants on the YouTube. And yes, I am a millennial, but I use the in front of internet terms because I'm a geriatric millennial, I think is the term. And tech is now my strong suit. So thank you to our IT team who are running around to all of the rooms to make all this happen and make it accessible to everybody online. So thanks everyone for tuning in. So in this session, we will hear from our panelists on how they're implementing the environmental justice strategy outlined in Governor Moore's transition plan, and all about how they're using a Justice 40 lens on the work that they're doing across agencies and across government. So this is the application of funding at least, I know the executive order says 40%. In Maryland, we like to use at least 40% of funding being allocated to communities overburdened and underserved. So we're going to hear from each department what's going on in that department, and then we'll be able to take a question at the end of each presentation, sort of a more technical question, if there's a clarification question, and then we'll get into some dialogue at the end of the presentation. Sound good to everybody? Yep. Okay. So we're going to start with the Maryland Environmental Service Director Glass. I will. Didn't I just say tech is not my strong suit from the beginning?
Thank you.
The stage is yours, and I'll be here timing you.
Oh, I was going to time myself.
Excellent.
Well, that's all right. I'll give myself 10 and then
Perfect.
I'll skip to the point. Now, so how many people in the audience know what the Maryland Environmental Service is? 1, 2, 3. All government workers? All government workers. So we are an independent state agency formed in 1970 to support the Clean Water Act as it was being promulgated through the US EPA and support the Maryland Department of Environment. So our independent state status is a little different. We're a not-for-profit business unit of the state of Maryland, so we are state employees. I wear the badge for everyone to remember that. I wish the secretaries could see this because all three of you are clients. I don't know if you know that. I mean, I know she knows that, but so we support state and local governments in Maryland, federal government, private industry. We're a multidisciplinary environmental compliance organization, very unique in our nation because we work in all phases of environmental, technical, and operational support. So we work from renewable energy to water and wastewater to dredge material management to recycling, composting, food waste and yard waste, et cetera, et cetera. So 65% of our budget is actually through intergovernmental agreements and contracts with state and county governments. 65% from just the state agencies, 30% from county governments, and the delta from private industry. I'm going to get to EJ, but I really like to have a level set because we're here to streamline procurement and execution in the support of the environment. I have special powers that are, if the Secretary of the Department of Environment calls me to ask me to do something, I can call my board chair for the environment. I can call my board chair, and if she approves, execute that day without worrying about money, without worrying about the situation with funding. And when the cost gets totaled up, if that jurisdiction or whoever that entity is that's been violating the environment, I can, after they don't pay, talk to her, then talk to the Department of Budget Management, talk to the comptroller, talk to the treasurer, and force payment. So it's a very unique. We've got eminent domain rights that we never utilize, et cetera, et cetera. So we're meant to be fast and respond for the environment. Very proud, over 1,000 projects all over the state. We're very, MES used to be the best little secret in the state. There were some issues a couple of years ago, not mine, a few years ago, but 2/3 of the revenue flows back to the private sector. Architecture and engineering companies are on shortlists. Construction companies are on shortlists. We can execute in lots of different areas. We're up to 800 positions, 760 employees currently in seats, and we made it to Baltimore Sun's top workplaces in 22. Survey's out right now to be there in 23, and we have tremendous team diversity and great work culture that I've been working on. Org chart, 4 different operational groups. Technical environmental services, that's mainly stormwater, but also embedded support to many state agencies. Environmental dredging and restoration, mainly working for the Maryland Port Administration. Environmental operations, working for Montgomery County, Prince George's County. So when people on this campus food waste compost, it goes to the Prince George's Organics Recovery Facility, and it is operated by MES for Prince George's County. When they recycle, it goes to a Prince George's County Material Recovery Facility in Capitol Heights, operated by the Maryland Environmental Service. Same thing is true in Montgomery County. So we do that for 7 counties. And then water, wastewater, primarily we're an emergency reaction force. So when the Secretary of Environment calls to help with the compliance of the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant, we go, we don't ask any questions. We're there for approximately 9 months. We get it back into compliance, and then we leave. We are not there to take people's ownership of people's property. We are only there to make sure that their environmental compliance is being met. And then a bunch of back office functions that every organization needs. So environmental dredging restoration, primarily for the Port of Baltimore. However, we also are just executing a dredging project in Deep Creek Lake. We've also executed dredging projects to improve water quality for Frederick County and to provide more enjoyment of lakes. So, but we do the dredge material. Each of my 4 operational groups has approximately 10 engineers that shepherd the architectural engineering projects. And then they also have lots of operators in the field. So we have heavy equipment operators. We have environmental specialists that are also doing lots of monitoring. And we work with all phases of planning, from pre-planning through permitting to design and then construction of facilities for the Port of Baltimore. And in all 4 groups, that's how we operate. Again, environmental operations, think of all things solid waste, recycling, wood grinding. We also have a great durable medical equipment program that's just in its 3rd, 4th year that is with the Maryland Department of Aging, where we are collecting materials from all over the state, keeping them out of landfills and refurbishing them, cleaning them, and getting them back into communities for free in support of the Maryland Department of Aging. For the Maryland Department of Environment, we collect used oil, antifreeze, carbon fluorocarbons from all over the state. And when I say we're doing it at all agencies, if they don't really let you know, we're doing vendor management for a lot of things, but there are some things we self-execute. But for things like collecting recyclables. There are haulers involved. There are collection organizations involved, and we manage those contracts for the state. Technical and environmental services, that's a smorgasbord. Couple key clients in this group, Maryland Department of Environment. We do a lot of app development for the Maryland Department of Environment. We also have a new growing relationship with the Maryland Department of Maryland Energy Administration, especially with the rollout of a lot of the energy programs as we were moving to a carbon-free environment. And we do a lot of sample collection from all over the state. So PFAS monitoring and measurement is here. The reason why there's snow at the airport, we do glycol recovery at the two major airports, at Martin State Airport and at BWI. And in water wastewater, we have smaller plants. Our largest plant is only 9 million gallons per day, but we do biosolids management and capital programming throughout the state in that as well. So we do all of the water wastewater treatment for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, all of the water and wastewater for Department of Health, for facilities that some of them they're leaving, and all of the water and wastewater for the Department of Natural Resources. So if you go to the park and you drink the water, or you go to the bathroom, MES is taking care of that water from one end of the state to the other. So had a little rebuild. So focus on our mission. So again, our mission is technical and operational support to everything in the environment. And we've got a lot of leeway with that. But our first pillar is safety. 7 people have died in the history of MES on the job. There have been no fatalities and no injuries while I've been in leadership. So the first thing I start with every new employee, and every time I have a group meeting, is safety is the first thing. We're going to, even though the environment is very important, the safety of our staff and the safety of our clients and the safety of our contractors is the most important thing. Our level of service, we focus on our internal level of service to each other, and of course to our external level of service to our clients, our client partners, and really focusing on education and training. We're creating career ladders. So we're an at-will employer, but we want everyone to know you're going to come in, you're going to get better. You might leave, go work for one of the other agencies, go get a management position when we don't have one, but we're going to focus on that education and training, both formal education and all types of certifications and growth. So my alarm hasn't gone off yet. So here's what I'll just get to. So good, this is the next slide. Here's what I've been doing. We're not appropriated. So I don't just get to move money around. And then our overhead, so we have project centers and cost centers. So cost centers are our overhead accounts. There's no overhead account for EJ efforts. So, but I have people that are fully overhead like myself. And so I start with myself. So about a year ago almost, I sat down with one other staff member who has a small project. She actually wrote a contract for DNR to do environmental education and outreach in Baltimore County for Baltimore County schools with people from EJ communities. And she wanted, and all that money goes to Baltimore County schools. It does not come to MES. I began a process of talking to people, reaching out to people. I did talk to Dr. Wilson, outreach to citizens advisory groups. We have helped the port with their image around the maritime industrial zone for decades. And there are citizens advisory groups around every major facility for the port. And so MES is on that outreach and education. I began outreach. So MDOT is my largest client partner. I was engaging with them in monthly meetings, trying to figure out how we could do things together. I've mentioned it to DGS. We're working on for the next 2 weeks. I've pushed staff to respond to a Reconnecting Communities grant with an EJ40 component that's a part of USDOT. All right, good. Well, I got to my 10 minutes, so I got to. So there are all these grants coming out. We're not a primacy agency. So everyone missed all that talk about appropriations and the fact that we're billable. I have no primacy. She has primacy. Okay. So if there's something so a Swiffer grant came out and we call MDE and we say, hey, can we write that for the Swiffer grant? MDE says, no, we're going to write it. We'll call you if we need your help afterwards. So that's what I mean by privacy. So in order for me to do EJ efforts, I have to call every one of the agency heads when it's in their domain. They say yes or they say no. If they say no, I walk away. If they say yes, I say, well, let's partner. So MEA has Solar for All. It has a $400 million cap, but they can only go for $100 million because of the size of the EJ communities they support. But they're putting that in. They say yes, MES is supporting them on that grant. So I reached out to some senators that I know have EJ communities, and I asked them, can I write? Do you have the other part? The other issue is having a group partner on the other side, a community that has good structure and that you can engage with them. So I found a champion in one senator, and he gave me a couple people. And DGS did accept. They have a brownfield on 3700 Poteet Street, and it's an old dump. It was cleared. Now it's overgrown. No one's using it. They have 8 acres. Baltimore City has the other 8 acres. I said, well, there's no brownfield, but there is reconnected communities. And this community in South Baltimore has no green space. You actually look, this green space is the only green space for a quarter mile, half a mile. But it's an old dump. They cleared the surface, but everything underneath is still bad. Well, that's exactly what we do. We can go in and we can take care of the contamination. We can either cap it. We can even, I learned today, we can cap and protect the trees. So you can still have the green space, but we can cap it. We're not going to, it's going to be too costly to dig and take it to a hazardous landfill when Maryland has no hazardous landfills. So what I'm doing, just to wrap up, is I have a small team of overhead positions. We are reaching out. We are trying to engage with community organizations and state agencies and support them in their EJ efforts and write as many proposals as we can for Bill and for the other one, and just see what we can do. I've reached out to EPA Region 3. We're reviewing all the NOFOs that are coming out, and we're doing that type of engagement to try to get new federal money for the key point that if it's in an EJ neighborhood, I don't have to ask State Highway for 20% match. It's 100% federal funded. And so I've even called counties and they hear me, but then they're also busy. They have a limited number of engineers and writers, but I have a new meeting coming up with Prince George's County DOT to say, we'll write it for you. Usually if MES is going to write something, we want you to pay for pre-award work. But in this case, I did squirrel away $250,000 internal funds to support staff to help me write those grants. So we're ready. Right. Anytime you want to, and that's it. So I got some other, building the strategy. I'm hiring a grants writer, and we are focused on next generation EJ and equity, community initiated solutions. Want the communities to tell us what they want in that neighborhood. And so DGS even said, if we clean that property, they will give it to the South Baltimore community and let them choose what they want to do for that green space. And I will end. Thank you.
Does anyone have a technical question for Director? Yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm Nicole. I have a question about you working with the local communities and municipalities. So you mentioned that you will do the grant writing work. How do you do the assessments in the beginning to find out what it is that the communities want? Do they always come to you, or do you reach out to them specifically?
So, in the context of what's happening right
So
it's just like one of those. So in the context of what we're doing right now, I talk generally to the, so Dr. Wilson brought people to me. Shoshonda Campbell, who was then made famous in some articles. I talk directly to whoever the executive director, leader, committee is. And I've even left it with people that once they tell me their situation, we will look. There's a Accelerator Justice 40 website that has a list of all the NOFOs that are coming out. And so when it matches, when the NOFO comes out, it's a brownfield NOFO and you can write for it. I'll ask Secretary McElwain, are they writing for it? And then we will write the proposal. So it's just direct contact, one-on-one.
Next up, we have Secretary of the Department of the Environment, Secretary McElwain.
Oh, okay. Just do this. Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. All right, let's get started. Okay, well, thank you. I just want to give a plug to you that your agency has been instrumental in helping us do what we need to do. Just the professionalism, if you're ever thinking about contacting Maryland's Environmental Services, the professionalism, the fact that your folks are always there, emergencies, I mean, the partnership that we have is so critical. So thank you for all that you do for us. So again, thank you for being here. We're going to talk about Justice 40 and what that means and all that we're doing in terms of environmental protection. Do you have your timer on for me? Okay. Well, and how much do I have? 10 minutes or 5?
No,
15. Okay.
I'll let you know at 10.
Okay. So this is such a pivotal moment that we have in terms of solving some of the environmental justice problems that we have. Our president, Joe Biden, thank goodness for him. As soon as he was elected, he started pushing forward on executive orders to address environmental justice. And that hasn't happened for decades, for years. And so we're just really grateful, my agency, really the country, for what the president is doing in terms of taking environmental justice seriously. And our Governor Westmore, is just as committed as the president is, and I'm just as committed as well. So we have the support. This is now our moment to do all the things we need to do when it comes to environmental justice. We don't have time to sleep. We don't have time to think about it and figure out how are we going to help these communities. It's time for us to get our plan together, make sure that we're building a greener, healthier communities for all across the state of Maryland. And so we're being intentional now. We have support, we have money, we have funding. So again, this is our time. So go to the next slide. I hope I do this right. All right. Okay. So in basic terms, I want to just talk quickly about what is Justice 40. I think you can easily remember. Well, how many of you in here understands and know exactly what Justice 40 means? Wasn't it difficult to figure out? The 40%, 40, right? So 40% of funding shall go to communities. And that's really critical for what we do. We have funding, we have state revolving funds, we have grants. So there's a lot of money in the country and in Maryland. And to have this Justice 40 initiative that says from the federal government, if you're going to use our money, then we're just going to dictate that you will give 40% of that money to the communities that need it the most. And so that's really profound for us. I'll just tell you, we're already, we typically give a little brag on Maryland. My department, my agency, we usually give more than 40% to communities. And again, those communities have been left behind so many years and for so long. So it's good that not just my agency, but all of our agencies, we have to devote that money to those communities. Okay, so I just want to share with you where I am when it comes to environmental justice. So the first thing that I did when I started was I talked with my staff and said, I want to do listening tours across Maryland, not as a political stunt, but we need to listen to those communities. I want them to be at the table from now on when we are talking about permits in their areas, regulations that we're thinking of putting into place, and just everything that's going on in their communities. We want to hear from them. And so the first thing that I did when I started was I met with Curtis Bay community, and it was really eye-opening. I heard so much. I heard a lot about the pain that they have, the suffering, and the fact that they felt that no one listens and no one cares at all. They live right in a community where they look out of their windows and they see this big train full of coal, nasty, dirty, stinky coal. When they open up their windows and forget about it and go play with their kids, they come back and in their homes, they literally have pictures of dust, the black dust all on their windowsills, in their house, on the floors. You go outside, they wash their car, come back a couple of hours later, the car is covered with dust, black dust. And so it's those kinds of issues that we need to hear and really try to help. They're used to us saying, oh, that's not in my agency. There's nothing I can do about that. And that's true to a certain extent. We regulate a certain piece of it, the air pollution. We don't regulate the trains. But in under this administration and under my leadership, we're going to do a lot more than we've done in the past. We're going to be bold and take a stand and do what we can. We may not win, but I'm definitely going to get tough when it comes to those permits. Everybody deserves clean air, clean water, clean land. It doesn't matter the color of your skin and what your zip code is. If you're going to breathe healthy air, and if you're going to be healthy in general. And so that's what I believe in, and that's what we've been doing. So I'll be visiting more states as we go along. The next thing I wanted to talk about just quickly, since I spent a lot of time on the other one, legislation. So we've made some headway when it comes to legislation. Back in 2022, in the legislative session, we were thrilled that HB 1200 was passed. And we now use that. What that law does, it allows us to look at the environmental justice screening tool that we have. So we can use that now to look at what the score is in a particular area, instead of just, looking at permits and going, okay, it's a permit, let me look at it. Now it's no, let's go to that environmental justice screening tool that we have, see what the score is in terms of poverty, underserved, all those factors. And so that was a win for us, because now we can see that if a particular area has a high EJ score, that matters to us. Now we're looking at it even more closely than we were. And so I have to tell you that we're just starting with legislation. We have more to come. We're going to be pushing more legislation that I can't talk about right now without getting in trouble. But just know that more is coming, and in a good way, for the EJ community. So now I want to talk a little bit more about this amazing tool that I just mentioned, the EJ screening tool. How many of you in here have heard of it? Okay. How many of you use it? Okay, that's good to know. So I'm still going to tell you this. You can find that tool at mde.maryland.gov. And it's really fun. So go play around with it. It's amazing. And that's, again, the tool that I was talking about earlier. So what's really important about the tool is if you look here, you'll see some of the darker areas. And again, most of you have played around with it. The darker, the color tells you, you can see the darker. Is that clear enough for you all? Okay, so it tells you the number of underserved people based on a census tract. So underserved, what does that mean? It means low income, minority, and low English proficiency. So it's really nice that you could just literally visual data. It just tells the story. So if you ever wonder, you want to put your address in and where you live, and you want to see, what kind of area that you're looking in, it's a really good tool for that. Okay. So here you can see that Baltimore City and the inner ring of the Beltway in PG County, Prince George's County, have the greatest concentration of underserved people. And so it's really clear, isn't it? It's really, really clear. And that's why this tool is really so important. So this slide is more about health indicators. So you'll notice that when we're looking at overburdened, in those same communities, and who's suffering from health indicators, you can kind of see that here. Do we have a slide where we kind of do this? Is that the next one? Okay. So let me just show you what we mean by that. So why does all this matter, right? Why does it matter if you live in an area with low income. So people put a lot of concentration on that. And a lot of people really say, so, okay, so what? I live in an area where it's low income people. Okay. It matters because you also see a certain race, you see low income, you see all these indicators. So it matters because when you see that orange, you also notice that you have more health problems in those communities. And that's the real issue, right? That's the concentration. And that's why this tool is really important to bringing that information to light for us. So that's again where you see the overlap of health issues, low income, education. It all matters. It gives a good story. All right. So I just have a couple more quick slides. And I'll just kind of bring it back to Justice 40 and why it's important. And I only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go really fast. So now I'm looking at funding. So we're thinking about like, where does that funding go? The 40% goes in those areas that we just talked about. Again, it's an easy indication for us when we're looking at permits. We just pull the screen up. Where does that 40% need to go? So that's basically what we're trying to show here. And we can track where the funds are going. We can track the infrastructure money. All of that is a part of my agency. Okay. And then next steps in terms of Justice 40 for Maryland. We're going to continue that community collaboration I talked about. We're going to keep looking at updating this EJ tool so that it's more usable for you and easy and intuitive for the communities, for everyone. So these are, I won't read it, but these are some of the areas in which our next steps are for Justice 40 for Maryland. Okay, and then you can see the EJ scorecard and timeline. I won't read that to you, but it's pretty self-explanatory. And we've been collaborating very closely with the Center of Environmental and Economic Justice and Health with Jacoby Wilson. And again, we'll just continue that kind of collaboration that we're doing. And that, I have one more slide and we're done. That's it. So thank you. Just want to express the commitment that we have. And was I within my time?
Perfect time. So
that.
It's really exciting to see, those definitions that Secretary was reviewing were actually codified into law in the state of Maryland through the 2022 Climate Solutions Now Act. Big climate bill puts our state on track to reduce emissions 60% by 2031. Public comment is open on that right now, so I encourage you to get involved. But there's a lot of important environmental justice provisions in that law as well, including the codification of those definitions. For years in Maryland, there was a lack of action on environmental justice because there was a lack of definition. People could use as an excuse for inaction. So having those definitions codified into law is really important so that the lack of definition can no longer be an excuse for inaction. And so it's really exciting to see the department put those into place right away through mapping tools. And so there's a clear data visualization and allocation of it. Now, the state was prepared when there's federal funding available to actually use those definitions, use that mapping to allocate those funding. So just wanted to emphasize some of those points. Any technical questions on this this presentation before we jump to Secretary Day? Going once, going twice. All right. Well then, next up from the Department of Housing and Community Development, Secretary Jake Day.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Jake Day, and as you heard, I represent the Department of Housing and Community Development, and it's an honor to be up here with my esteemed colleagues. So you might be asking yourself, housing and community development, how does that fit into this conversation? One of the things that we know is that when we're looking at outcomes, and we're all interested in outcomes, is that housing is healthcare, and that the environmental health impacts of our communities and our neighborhoods and the externalities of those things that have been placed in close proximity to low-income neighborhoods exacerbate those negative outcomes. And so it's housing, it's the places we build, it's the way we build them, And as you'll hear from the last secretary on the panel, it's how we decide to cite those things proximate to one another that produces those outcomes. So, look, when I was appointed by Governor Moore to this position, one of the things that I outlined for our department was 5 objectives. And you won't be surprised to hear some of them, and maybe not any of them. But I wanted to start off by sharing those with you. Number 1 is that we wanted to adopt an ethic of shelter for all, that we'd recognize that shelter ought to be a human right. And to the extent that we could implement that in policy, we were going to doggedly pursue that, identifying measurable goals and real policies that we could put into place to achieve that. The second is that we would expand affordable housing. And you might be thinking to yourself, yes, Secretary of Housing, that sounds like your job. But I want to point out that we have underbuilt housing in this country since the 2008 financial crisis. We basically just stopped building housing at a rate that had any relationship to our population. And so we have a shortage, we have a scarcity problem. And the laws of supply and demand still work, and we don't have enough housing anymore. And so we've all seen the effects. Housing is getting more and more expensive for everyone. The third objective is to build and to make lovable places. And the point there is that often when government gets involved in making things and building things, we've got a history for not building great things. And we have a history for giving people the most in need the least, and building places that were devoid of lovable qualities. And so we believe pretty strongly that we can fix that and do better. Following on Secretary McElwain's points about listening, part of our responsibility there is to do community engagement in an authentic way and to hear people out. Because there's a reason people have a certain image in their mind when we say affordable housing, and it's not necessarily a positive one. The fourth is that we connect all Marylanders, and that has to do with our responsibility as having the state office of broadband and ensuring that access to the digital economy was no longer a barrier to the next step in someone's path from where they are today to where they can be. And finally, and this is really what I was trying to get to today, finally, that the last objective is that we would work to right the wrongs of the past, to acknowledge that government, in hand with financing institutions and the private sector and social organizations and politicians, worked really hard, deliberately, to set a course for Maryland families and American families based on their race that was different from others. And we have an obligation to work proactively and deliberately to undo that. And so our policies focus on counteracting the past policies of redlining, urban renewal, urban highway construction, have to be, again, a deliberate counteraction. It's going to take a lot of work to get there, because if I could borrow the geographic location that you shared, Secretary McElwain, Curtis Bay, residents in Curtis Bay, where they sit today when they open that window and they see coal dust coming in and they look out over the train tracks and those train cars filled with coal, they're looking out and they can see the high rises of downtown Baltimore, of the Inner Harbor. And then in the foreground, and by the way, that's a policy decision, right? That represents wealth and capital anchored in place. And in the foreground, between the two, the other thing that they're seeing is Baltimore Peninsula. They're seeing revitalization. They're seeing investment. They're seeing somebody gaining. And what's changing in Curtis Bay? That's the question. And I think all of us up here are committed to doing better by Maryland residents. So I'm going to quickly move through, because I'm sure I'm. Oh, look, I even had a slide for that. I apologize. So I'm going to move through and kind of talk about some of the areas that DHCD is responsible for and where we've been putting in effort. So I think it's really critical to note that DHCD is a lending institution. So we're a bank, among other things. We're an HFA. Every state has an HFA, a housing finance agency. And we are a large lending institution. We do about $2 billion in lending a year, and significant amount of grants as well. But our loans and our financing of housing development, small business, mortgages, those are the tools with which we have to shape different outcomes. And money is a powerful tool. So I want to start by talking about energy efficiency. House Bill 169 was passed into law this past year, and the General Assembly that passed that law, and the Governor Moore, who signed that bill into law, we're doing so attempting to ensure that a number of things change. But one of the most important of which that we're responsible for is that low income housing could benefit from dollars, from our Empower dollars, the dollars collected on your and my energy bills, that those dollars would go to actually fund retrofits to ensure that utilities weren't burdening people, low income people in the most energy inefficient homes. Because today, all of those dollars can go to every single house in Maryland except for low income housing. Those dollars are not going into our low income housing properties to retrofit them. And so HB 169 went a long way toward mandating new requirements, which, yes, that means an additional dollar or two on your and my energy bill, but that's going to go to ensure that the most low income families in Maryland were receiving the benefits of what we've all been paying into and they've been paying into with Empower. It also created the Green and Healthy Task Force, and the Green and Healthy Task Force is responsible not only for developing the rules and regulations around the Empower funds, but also providing a comprehensive plan for the state for energy retrofits for low-income housing. That includes our efforts to apply for Solar for All funds and beyond, so that we're ensuring that maximum dollars are going into the most low-resourced and low-income households in the state, to ensure that those folks are benefiting from our resources. I want to also point out that we have reorganized a portion of our department to focus on a whole home approach, acknowledging that many of our programs have led in the past to employees and contractors from DHCD and organizations like ours to show up in the home, find that there are other challenges other than energy efficiency retrofit needs, such as accessibility issues, other critical repair needs, and have to walk away from the project because, that's not the color of dollar that I have in my hand, and that's not what I'm here to do today. And so I have to walk away from your project. A whole home approach ensures that once we're in, we're all the way in, and that we will pull in the right resources from the right pot of money to address the challenge in that person's home. The Empower plan submitted allocates $355 million that'll serve 60,000 low-income households in the state. This is $355 million that will come in various tranches over the next 3 years, starting with a relatively small amount this year and working its way up to the full amount in 3 years. This is intended to have, again, a major effect on the efficiency of those legacy buildings, but critically, this is also job creation. I want to point out that the dollars that we invest, the limited state dollars that we have, and we all recognize the fiscal situation that we're in. You've heard about it, you've read about it, but those limited dollars produce a significant return. There's a green economy that we're all aware of. There's opportunity for training and workforce development, and there's opportunity for work. And so these dollars are going right back into neighborhoods, right back into communities. And we're very excited about what work we'll be able to do. Also want to point out that our responsibility isn't limited only to energy efficiency. Of course, it goes well beyond that. We're building significant housing. We're attempting to do as much net zero work as we can. We actually have a program designed for net zero housing development, affordable housing development. This past year, fiscal year 2023, we created an estimated approximate $460 million in value of housing, with an additional $8.2 million in federal housing funds. That was leveraged against $117 million of state dollars, state resources that went into our projects, and $410 million in bond financing. And we pair these things together to produce over $1 billion, $1.2 billion in new affordable housing in FY23. And I'm hopeful that we'll exceed that figure in FY24 and beyond. We are working hard to ensure those dollars are going into the right places. And historically, what that meant was ensuring that we were rebuilding those unlovable places that I talked about. It also meant that we were putting dollars into areas like Baltimore City, which maybe had historically not received enough. But if that sounds not nuanced to you, it's because it's not. So let's talk about the future. in the future, what we need to do is have a critical look at where the effects of policies such as redlining have gone and how we repair the damage that was done. And it's not as simple as putting a dollar back. And look no further than urban renewal programs in the late 20th century to say a dollar is not a dollar. A dollar invested has to be invested in the right way, or else it has the potential to erase wealth. It has the potential to erase neighborhoods that are strong, erase neighborhoods that have a high rate of Black ownership, Black business ownership and home ownership, and instead replace it with the glitzy new construction that we see as a result of gentrifying effects. And so one of the things that we are doing at DHCD is working to map the effects of those policies and use that to ultimately guide future investments. And now we have a vision toward what that looks like in the future, but I'll tell you, today we released the map that will guide our home ownership dollars, our home ownership investment dollars. That program was piloted last year in Baltimore City and Cambridge, in the Pine Street and Johnston Square neighborhoods in Cambridge and Baltimore, respectively. And now that it's available in almost every jurisdiction statewide, in almost all 24 jurisdictions statewide. Our QAP, which is the document, our Qualified Allocation Plan, which is the document that guides affordable housing development, is also designed this year to begin to unwind the concentration of poverty. And so it's not just about, let's build affordable housing in the places that have historically had low incomes, but rather let's figure out how we can do it in such a way that we diversify these neighborhoods socioeconomically without displacing people. And so this work is not just about low-income housing tax credit projects. It's also about our mortgage programs. A significant amount of our investment, including that mapping released today, is oriented on ensuring that people who have not had access to mortgages traditionally gain access to mortgages, and that those dollars are used then to rebuild home ownership in the most underinvested and divested of communities. It's not surprising, as I mentioned, to hear that many of our maps align. If you look at the EJ mapping that Secretary McElwain shared, looks a lot like our redlining maps. Looks a lot like the Black Butterfly in Baltimore City. And so our Home Ownership Works program, as well as our our state revitalization program maps orient around the same type of maps and repair work that we want to do. That you saw in Secretary McElwain's maps. Now, that being said, we don't just stop with sort of placemaking and housing. We are also a business lender. So a significant amount of our work is oriented, and I've got 1 minute left to do this. A significant amount of our work is oriented toward business development, recognizing that wealth creation is not just achieved in America through home ownership, but it's also through business ownership and other opportunities at real estate development. And so our Emerging Developers Loan Fund, our State Small Business Credit Initiative dollars through Neighborhood Business Works, which is a lending program that we have, and even our last iteration of Project Restore, which was a COVID era program, but we've recaptured about $12 million that will be going back into neighborhood businesses, are all being oriented on helping minority-owned businesses in neighborhoods that have, again, been traditionally underinvested or where we've seen wealth escape, that we want to bring it back and, again, do it in such a way that repairs the damage done by past policymaking. So I've got more, but I'll stop there and say thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation.
Any technical questions? Yes.
Thank you for mentioning that you're working on affordable housing. Obviously, so my question is around ensuring that the homes are not only affordable, but that's going to impact lifespan and life force. So how is your office of that? And then if you all can share at the end how that works around the intersection. totality of all of it together.
Mhm.
So we've got the mapping, we've got folks needing to work on infrastructure as it relates to sewage, back, all of that. How does that work when we're moving forward in these? Maybe not now, but
You want me to hit it now, or okay? So, great question, and the fact that you're asking that question through a frame of thinking about collaboration is the right mindset, because as I have learned this week, the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Department of the Environment, the Department of Health, the Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development, Baltimore City Department of Health, all of our organizations have a role to play in lead poisoning. All of our organizations, and bureaucratic barriers to helping a kid that has elevated blood lead levels must be broken down. And so one of the things that I was amazed to learn this week, and it took way more time than it should have taken, is that there are 37 children in Maryland right now, most of them in Baltimore City, that have severe lead poisoning cases, whose home is in some stage of being remediated, abated, right? 37 children. We should know their names. We should be, and this isn't an indictment of past barriers or past organizational leaders. This is look no further than us. I mean, we need to know that, and it ought to be front and center. That's one of those things that is so critical, and the speed of action is so critical, that we have to work at breaking down any barrier that stands in our way. And so it took me some time. I figured out that there are 37 children, but we have to make sure that the next people who walk into our offices, that it's just a dashboard right front and center. They can see it day one. They know it. Their staff knows it. There's no question. The public can see it. And that's not where we're at yet. And so one of the things I'm committed to is figuring those things out. And I think it takes bureaucrats. That's what we are. It takes bureaucrats who are willing to say the bureaucracy, the process, the organization is secondary. The principle and the person is primary, and that's the way we'll operate. So every time there's a choice between the two, and I'm just being blunt, and someone in staff, someone in the department, someone in another department saying, well, that takes a lot of time. That's really cumbersome. We have to check this box, and there's this federal requirement and that federal requirement. We've got to be able to say that matters far less than the 9-year-old child who was in a home poisoned by lead, and whose landlord moved them to another home in order to move them out of that environment, and their lead level rose. We have to avoid those sorts of things ever happening again. That's got to be our primary focus. And right now, believe me, it is. I'm getting super intimate with the details, and I'm sure I'm not the only one at this table.
And just to add to something you said during your presentation, to the Empower program and the whole home approach, working at a climate, Maryland League of Conservation Voters and working on climate policy, where we can find win-wins, whole home approach and Empower are huge solutions to reaching our emissions reductions targets, which is a focus of the state. And if we can build in healthy housing initiatives into climate goals, and we can find ways to win is a everybody check your bill when you get home. Everybody pays in to Empower. Everybody pays in. The amount of that funding and the low income program is actually run through DHCD, going to low income households was at like 0.04%. Fact check me, but it was really, really, really low, which means people are paying into a program that they're not benefiting from. And, again, gearing up to work on a campaign for 100% clean energy by 2035, the cleanest energy is the energy we don't use. So if we can invest in energy efficiency programs that improve that, when you go into a house and you say, yes, we have the opportunity to weatherize, but first we're going to put in the safety rail in your shower because we recognize that you have mobility issues. That's what the whole home approach married with the energy efficiency program does. And that's really what I wanted to sort of put a finer point on that Empower program and the whole home approach. And again, if you want to write that as a comment on Maryland's climate pathway report, which the public comment is open right now, due October 15th. And if you want to tell your story and say it's critical to have a whole home approach as part of a climate solution, right now is the time to say that, because what we say in the next few weeks is going to impact policies that the state is working on for the next 8 years, because our climate goals are 2031. We have 20 minutes left in our session, so we're going to hand it over to our last speaker, Secretary Flora from the Department of Planning, and then we'll have a few minutes for dialogue after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So who knows what planners do? Two people from the Department of Planning. Okay. Well, I'm here to debunk a few things. And so we have whole house thinking, whole home thinking. We're about whole community thinking, and we're very cross-disciplinary. Quick story, people have asked me, how did you get this job? I applied into the transition portal with 3,000 other resumes, and got called several weeks later to come to Baltimore because I was a finalist. Okay, great. But as I've looked at that and I've talked to the folks at the governor's office, it's the cross-disciplinary experience in the trenches, real life lived experience that I feel like why I came up out of those 3,000 resumes and what I'm trying to bring to the Department of Planning. It's having lived and worked in low-income neighborhoods, being first-generation college, having struggled with all of these things that we're talking about. And so how do you really make communities stronger and better? And that's what we're about. And so I approached this presentation a little bit differently because that's what I tend to do, being the radical that I am. And to really, really think about, well, what do we do now? Because I really needed to share that. And the thing about the Department of Planning that you'll learn in a minute, as I talk to a little bit more about it, is that we have no funding. We make no loans. We don't have grant programs. We have been gutted in the last several years. We're the little engine that could, quite frankly. We are a small agency that works really hard to try to figure out how to work on the ground with communities, to give voice, to give guidance, to develop programs where we can help influence. And so with that, I am incredibly grateful for the team that I inherited, that we're working with. And I just want to acknowledge Joe Griffith over there, who basically will tell you all you want to know about some of these things, along with the rest of the team, because he's been the one really in the trenches at the Department of Planning, along with many others, helping to do what we can with our lens. So that's a little bit about, this slide is about what we do now, but I really want to look forward in terms of where we're going. And so we were challenged, all the cabinet members were, with developing a strategic plan, and get this, 3 months. Something that usually takes maybe 18 months if you're doing it really, really well. Well, we embarked on that, and it really was something that I was committed to almost from day one, of you really have to look internal and assess what's going on within before you can begin to, I think, really do your job better on the outside. So we rewrote our vision statement, rewrote the mission statement. We do have a draft strategic plan that's at the governor's office as part of all of our commitments that we needed to make. But what was key in this, I think, in trying to really work with our team, we engaged the entire team. Our process included all 130 something of us, because that's as big as we are. We had a big all staff retreat, and we really began by everybody becoming engaged in the process, because that's who we are and what we do. And if we don't do that internally, how are we going to do and help others externally? So keywords here: upheld. Our future view is uphold human well-being and ecological regeneration. There's a lot of buzzwords get thrown around. I've been doing this stuff for 40 years. The words change over the years. The systems change, the rankings change. But, I am proud to say for 40 years, evolved in that. And I see Nicole nodding because she saw me at the U.S. Green Building Council when we were tackling some of these things. The other thing about the Maryland Department of Planning, MDP, is I tend to be cross-disciplinary. Our entire agency is horizontal. We are not focused on one particular piece of the puzzle. We are the thread, I think, that does weave across to the earlier question and tries to connect all the disciplines, all of the agencies in some way. And so starting with sort of what we see as a vision, then you have to sort of think about, well, how do we help? What is our role in helping Maryland get there? So, in looking at our agency, the thing that folks don't realize is only about a quarter of our entire agency are planners. We're made up of, we're this agency that it seems that over the years, people have sort of added things. Maryland Historic Trust was added to us. Under them is Jefferson archaeologists and historians and people working in communities. So my job early on was to figure out how to connect all these disparate parts of who we are. We have the state data center. The data you saw earlier, that comes from us because we're the US Census people. And so all the raw data that feeds into all these tools and analysis comes from our data team that basically leads the whole US Census effort and does all of the projections and all of the work, whether it be where the schools are going and some of those types of things, a whole array of activity. So all of these pieces, and then our team of planners who work so hard in what they do with very limited, keep doing more with less, because that's what we kind of do. One thing I created was an external affairs that's new for us because we weren't talking about and talking with and forming partnerships as much as I thought we could be doing. So that's new. There's going to be a few other new things because I really felt that the structure needed to be really thought about even deeper to attain some of our goals. There's one other piece of that I'm going to share at the very end. Wait to the end to share. The other thing about us, which is why I feel like we do have this, while we may not have authority in some respects, I heard a great word the other day, which is assumed authority. We are assuming authority because by the fact that we work with all these different agencies and the list is growing, we have this ability to connect the dots, I call it, and to sort of integrate in multiple ways with how we really think about whether it be issues of equity, justice, all of the different labels that we want to put on these issues of making communities healthier, making people healthier, making basically our world a better place. The other thing that we get to do is serve on multiple commissions. This is where we get to see each other most, is not only on these speaking engagements. So I listed just a few, and I'm learning the acronyms, but I am sitting on every one of these. And in doing that, giving voice. And so I think some of them are surprised. IAC, for instance, were like, can we meet with you in advance of the next meeting? Because I was asking a lot of questions. So everyone I go to, I ask questions. And sometimes they're rhetorical, but it's because these things need to get asked. And I'm in a position to do that as our staff. And so I think there's about 40 total, but I think these are just give you a sense of what's going on there. So with that lens, small agency, limited power, no funds, great staff, incredibly dedicated teams that are about facilitating, bringing, convening, and pulling people together. Where do we fit in to all of this? And so where we fit in is we can provide leadership and give voice because we're in these different places and opportune moments. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is empower our team. I heard a word, and I'm going to use it because I tend to not feel that you should hold back. I had team members say that they felt muzzled. They felt, disempowered. I had folks that basically weren't allowed to speak up. That's changing. I think the first thing we can do is empower our people to have a voice and to be involved. Training and education. one of the things I think we can do is that training and education at the local level, help locals be empowered, have the tools, have the voice, have the words, know what a zoning codes are just crazy. I'm sorry, I'm a planner. They have become so ridiculously hard to read. I had to look up my zoning code recently in my town, and I'm reading through it and I'm like, okay, yeah, I think we can do this or we can't do that. How are lay people supposed to figure that out? We can help with that through training and education at the local level. Policy and program integration. By being involved in policy development, we can ensure that these things are integrated. We do have some policy initiatives, which we're not allowed to share either yet. That's unusual. Planning doesn't usually proactively put forth policy. We review, we provide fiscal reports, but we're switching that game up. Data analysis is huge. Not only data in a very stagnant way, but analysis, correlations, just as you saw on the map. How do these things interconnect? How are we looking at them? And that's the great thing I love about this. The hardest job of this part of this job is dealing with internal state systems. The best part of the job is this incredible cabinet team I get to work with, because we are so collaborative. We're talking to each other. We're figuring out how do we make connections. It's fabulous. But if we don't have indicators and we don't have metrics and we don't have reporting for accountability, which I feel is part of our agency, then we don't know if we're moving the needle, if we're doing the right thing to really, make progress. Convene and facilitate, that's what we do, planners. We can't help. My daughter once told me after she became an adult, she said, "You're facilitating me." I said, "Yeah, I've been doing that your whole life." She's now a planner, so she gets it. Forming partnerships and affiliations. The reason I put these other systems out there, like I said, we've been at this a long time. There's a whole array of systems out there. It is so exciting that the White House has put forth Justice 40. You really do need that statement from a high level and integrate into policy. But I would challenge us all, and that's what planning will be doing, is to know that it has to be comprehensive. That's why I like to use environmental and social justice. We have to comprehensively look at these issues and look at the thread that relates to opportunity and all the things that interconnect. And these are a few that I've used, some that I've actually developed over the years. And I hope that as planning, we're going to draw from all of them to figure out, well, what are the comprehensive set of indicators that we can be using for Maryland? Did that in Pittsburgh. I led that project. I think we can do that here too. Finally, big thank you for what's yet to come, because we're going to need your support. We're going to need your advice. And I am announcing to you all for the first time today that Yasmin Ram, who is my assistant to the secretary, is going to be our new SEJ coordinator. So I am committed to this. Yasmin's committed to this. This is going to be in the secretary's office. She is going to need help, because a part of her job is going to be to help find how we connect inside of our agency. How do we train? How do we then do better at how we integrate? And I think it starts with assigning it to somebody who says, we're going to help you, but you're going to help us figure out how do we do all this better. And Yasmin's up for the challenge. She's, has an amazing background, and I'm looking forward to you all helping her, because it's all about a community, right? This is our group at our retreat, and I believe in community. I've been teaching it, practicing it, and I do think it's about how we as a community move forward. So thank you.
Wow. So I know at least 3 of the 4 speakers are confirmed, appointed and confirmed. And I just, as someone who works for League of Conservation voters, I do have to say elections matter. And wow, what a difference an election can make. And just the enthusiasm, commitment, and action behind the commitment we're seeing. So just a friendly reminder to vote. With that, any technical questions on the Department of Planning presentation? I think I might be a planner, just after listening to the characteristics of planners. Yeah, my son's 14 months. I think I facilitated. So I want to start off with the question we heard earlier from the audience. Can we hear from each of you briefly how you're working across across departments? I think each of you has shown your commitment to Justice 40 and has talked about department specific initiatives. How are you seeing this across interdepartmental, across departments, and what can we expect, I think, over the next few months and years?
I don't know why the non-secretary keeps going first. So this is a marketing opportunity for me. So just to be clear, you'll be getting my card. You'll be getting my card. Hopefully the secretary now knows that I'm moving along with some of the ideas I've expressed to her. So we just want to write as much as we can to help as much as we can. And by partnering, by bringing communities to the other agencies and thinking about what they're doing. They have a coordinator. Okay, well, I'm trying to coordinate too. And I have started to curate community organizations and nonprofits that are doing good work in their communities. And so as the secretary, we'll just continue to organize and unite and write together to get funding, and not just ask for the state agencies to provide the funding, but the federal government for as long as these opportunities exist between IRA and bill.
I'll keep it real short because we have 30 seconds, I think. Yep. So I just want to put a little brag and plug out, since you bragged about your EJ coordinator. I too have one. Brandon is right here in front, brand new to Maryland's Department of the Environment. I also established an EJ office, a brand new office, and we're looking to hire an assistant secretary. So it's been elevated. So quickly, coordination. We are coordinating across the cabinet. Justice 40 is a way for us to coordinate even more, because we're all on the hook for diverting 40% of funding to all that we do. Reason why it's so important: when we're out, Brandon and I and our team are out in the air department, what we're hearing, all of your areas and mine. So when we show up, we're hearing, oh, the transportation is terrible here. The roads, they have potholes in our cars. I'm like, oh, that's transportation. Oh, and the housing, look at the housing. Like you said, look across there. You see these high rises that are nice. Look at our crappy housing. Well, that's housing. But all this is coming to me. And then planning. Who put the trains here in the first place? Who had anything to do with the zoning? Oh, that's Secretary Flora. So, and that's what I tell them too. Yeah, it's local. A lot of it is local. So what we're doing together is coordinating all of those things. We're going to start doing it even more as an administration.
She said it perfectly.
I think the biggest thing is what I aspire to do through the Smart Growth Subcabinet. Several of us are on that subcabinet. We're cross-discipline talking, using that as an opportunity to really think about how do we grow in Maryland and do it in a way that it's incredibly collaborative and coordinated. It is hard for us to each find time, but those few forums that we get like that, we come out of them usually pretty jazzed, pretty excited about possibilities, and really just sharing that kind of information through those types of forums. So I think for me, that's going to be the biggest platform, biggest forum we have for ensuring that we really, really do well with this cross-disciplinary interagency collaboration.
So to wrap up, lightning round question for each of you. We've talked about investments. We've talked about some of your priorities. Where do you hope we are in 2 years on this? So we spend the next 2 years doing the work. You spent 3 months writing a strategic plan, fastest strategic planning ever. You have it in place. We're at this conference. It's the 9th. We're at the 11th Siege conference, reconvening. where do you hope to be? Where do you hope that these initiatives, where do you hope that the Justice 40 lens, where do you hope this federal investment, what are you going to be saying to us in 2 years? Lightning round, each of you to wrap up.
Yeah, it's my hope that in 2 years, we're able to say that there's one place you can go in the state of Maryland to understand the progress that we've made in those 2 years, that there's a clear dashboard that shows what effect we've had on outcomes from human health, from wealth generation, and ensuring that communities are more equal, and that justice is actually being done, and that we can measure the effect of that.
This may seem small, but it could have really multi-generational influence. And that would be to ensure all local communities through our education programs have been educated in how to integrate these issues into their comprehensive planning process and to actually succeed in evolving, because they don't get updated all the time, but evolving and integrating that into their comprehensive plans.
2 years, I hope that EJ communities are better because of Justice 40. A lot of money is being poured into those communities, and we can see it. That's the vision for me for 2 years.
Similarly, just projects delivered in those communities, and to help people feel like their neighborhoods are improving without gentrification taking over.
So this is being recorded. And so in 2 years, we can we can look back. Anybody ever watch, who watches the Oscars? Anybody like Emmys, Oscars, award shows, and they do all the podcasts around them and they do the predictions. And then afterwards they go back and say like, "Oof, I was wrong," or or what do we say? So we're going to do that. So 2 years, we'll be back, and I mean we'll also be back next year because it's a great conference. But in 2 years we'll be back and we'll play this, and we'll see where we were. Yeah. So that's a great thing about YouTube, right? Or the YouTube. Thank you very, very much to Dr. Wilson and the team at Siege for putting on this tremendous conference. It is there's so much information. I encourage you to check out the YouTube channel, the social media handles. They're recording everything and they're immediately available online. So check out all the recordings. If you're missing concurrent sessions, there's so much information to be shared. They'll be virtual again tomorrow, and in person again on Saturday. So a couple more sessions left today. Thank you all for your engagement. Thank you again to our secretaries and directors for an awesome conversation, for their commitment to environmental justice and Justice 40. And we look forward to seeing the delivery of these commitments. So thank you so much.
Yes. All right.